Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stand at the edge of a medieval battlefield, staring into the soil where thousands of forgotten bodies lie, waiting for someone, maybe you, to uncover their secrets? Before we descend into the shadows of these mass graves, take a moment, just a few seconds, to like this video. Let me know in the comments if you believe what I am about to tell you, and, of course, hit that subscribe button if you are ready to join me on this strange and unsettling journey. Only do it if you truly dare, because once we step inside there is no turning back. Picture Europe during the Middle Ages, cities wrapped in smoke, streets that smelled of both bread and blood, and nights that seemed endless because the stars themselves were hidden by fear. Death was not a distant concept, it was a neighbor. Sometimes it was the loudest voice in the village. Wars raged not just between kings, but between hunger and survival, between sickness and prayer, and where life failed, the earth opened its mouth wide, swallowing entire crowds into what we now call mass graves. But here's the chilling part. These graves were not simply pits of soil and bones. They were books written in silence, chapters of history that no one wanted to read. And yet they could not be erased. Archaeologists today stumble upon these sites by accident, a farmer digging a new well, a construction team laying foundations, or even a child kicking at stones in the field, and every time the ground answers back, whispering through skulls cracked by centuries, through teeth clenched in final screams, through skeletons locked together like they were still fighting even after the war ended. And the question for you is this: if you were the one who found that first bone jutting from the dirt, would you keep digging, or would you cover it up, pretending you never saw it, afraid that whatever was buried was meant to stay hidden? Tonight, you and I will dig together, and what we uncover will not just be history. It will be the kind of truth that bends between fact and nightmare. It begins quietly, as many dark stories do. In a small village in Eastern Europe, centuries after the Middle Ages, a team of archaeologists set out to expand a churchyard. They expected broken pottery, maybe the foundation of an old well. Instead, the soil gave them a ribcage, then another, then dozens more. Tangled together like roots of a tree that had grown too wild. This was not just one person. It was not even a family plot. It was a community buried in haste, as though someone had wanted them forgotten, not remembered. The team unearthed skulls with cut marks suggesting violent deaths. Some had arrows still lodged in their bones. Others bore no sign of injury at all. Only jaws locked wide as if screaming into eternity. And suddenly, history came alive, not in the way of dusty textbooks, but in the chill that slid down their spines. Because standing over these bones, the archaeologists could almost hear the chaos, the clash of steel, the shouts of terrified peasants, the crackle of fire consuming roofs. What makes it worse is that these discoveries rarely come with answers. Records from the medieval era are patchy, and mass graves were often deliberately unmarked. Who were these people? Victims of war, outcasts of a plague, or something stranger, something the records refused to put into ink? In one archived letter, written by a monk who witnessed such a burial, there is a strange line: "We laid them down quickly before the sun could rise." For the air itself was heavy with their curse. Was it poetic exaggeration, or a genuine fear that the dead could rise again? Now I ask you, if you were one of the villagers, forced to throw your neighbor, maybe even your own brother, into that pit before dawn, how would you sleep the next night? Would you pray harder? Or would you start doubting the God who allowed such horror? Imagine the clang of swords echoing across a muddy field, banners ripped apart by the wind, and men shouting names that history no longer remembers. The Middle Ages were soaked in blood, and not every fallen soldier received a heroic burial. Many of them were shoveled together into pits. Stripped of armor, stripped of names, stripped of dignity. One excavation in France revealed such a pit. Over 200 soldiers layered on top of one another like discarded dolls. Their bones told the story their lips could no longer. Fractured skulls from blunt weapons, shattered femurs from cavalry charges, arrowheads lodged in spines. Each injury was a sentence in a brutal narrative of war. But here's the unsettling twist. Among the soldiers were bodies of peasants, even women. What were they doing on the battlefield? Were they caught fleeing, or were they part of something darker, human shields, sacrifices? Or simply unlucky souls swept into the tide of slaughter? A forgotten chronicle, penned by a scribe loyal to a duke, described one such battle. He wrote, "The pit was dug deep, not out of respect, but to make sure no hand could ever pull them out again. That line carries more weight than it seems. Why fear that someone might pull them out? Unless, of course, the belief was that the dead might return, not as saints, but as restless avengers. Now place yourself in that moment. You are a soldier who somehow survived. You stand at the edge of the mass grave as your comrades are hurled in like sacks of grain. The stench burns your lungs. You clutch your sword, but it feels useless now. Do you kneel and pray for them? Do you curse the Lord who sent you to fight? Or do you laugh bitterly? Because in the Middle Ages, death was sometimes the only guarantee of equality. You have probably heard of the Black Death, the plague that swept across Europe like a storm no one could outrun. But imagine not the statistics, not the numbers in a textbook, but the raw terror of watching your neighbor collapse in the morning and being forced to bury him before nightfall. Mass graves were not just for the defeated in war, they became the grim punctuation marks of epidemics. In London, archaeologists uncovered a pit where hundreds of plague victims were dumped, bodies stacked in rows like firewood. Some were wrapped in shrouds, others thrown in naked, stripped by desperate gravediggers who believed cloth carried infection. But here's the strange detail. Several skeletons were found with coins pressed into their mouths. A pagan ritual long outlawed by the church. Who put them there? Was it fear of the soul wandering, or a secret rebellion against the rigid faith of the time? The chronicles describe entire villages abandoned, doors barred with red crosses painted on them, warning anyone who passed, death lives here. At night, monks marched through the streets chanting prayers while bells tolled endlessly, the sound shaking even the strongest hearts, yet beneath all the ritual, fear ruled. People whispered that the plague was not disease but punishment, that demons had slipped into the air carried on the breath of rats. And then comes the chilling twist. Not everybody in those pits belonged to the infected. Some were healthy, killed out of panic, accused of witchcraft, of poisoning wells, of consorting with the devil. In terror, entire families were hurled into the same grave. That is the part we rarely see in clean history books. The way fear turns humans into executioners. So let me ask you, if you lived in that village, and your neighbor coughed once, just once, would you stand by him, or would you push him toward the pit, just to protect your family? There is an old superstition in parts of Europe. If you listen carefully at night near a mass grave, you can hear the ground breathing. At first, it sounds like the wind shifting through grass, but then it grows, groans, sighs, the echoes of voices that should have been silent for centuries. Archaeologists laugh at such tales until they spend a night guarding their own excavations. More than one has admitted off record that they heard something move beneath the soil. One account comes from a dig in Poland. Workers swore they heard knocking, soft, rhythmic, as if someone trapped below was trying to call for help. They dismissed it as coincidence until they uncovered coffins with scratch marks on the inside lids. Were people buried alive during times of panic? Or was the knocking only in their heads, stirred by the weight of history pressing down on them? Even worse are the local legends. In some villages, elders warned children never to walk near certain fields at night. They claimed the dead there were restless, not because of unfinished business, but because their deaths were unjust, killed too soon or accused unfairly. If you hear your name whispered in the dark, one tale goes, do not answer. It is not the living calling you. Of course, modern science explains away most of this. Shifting soil, underground water, even the sound of your own heartbeat amplified in the silence. But is not it more unsettling that the rational answer does not comfort us? Because deep down we know the earth has a memory, and sometimes it leaks through the cracks. So tell me, if you were standing over a mass grave tonight and you heard your own name whispered from beneath the soil, would you answer? Or would you run? When we think of medieval battles, we picture knights in armor clashing swords, banners flying. But in the graves, it is often the bones of women and children that stare back at us. Their presence is the most haunting because it forces us to ask what happened to them. In one excavation in Germany, a pit revealed tiny skeletons. Children no older than 6, buried alongside their mothers. Some bore marks of disease, others bore none at all. What do you make of that? Were they victims of famine, killed by neglect, or slaughtered because an enemy army did not want survivors? Imagine holding your child in the middle of a raid, knowing there is no escape. Would you run, or would you hide, or would you simply pray for the end to be quick? A lost manuscript from a convent hints at darker truths. A nun recorded, the little ones cried until their voices were no more, and we laid them beside their mothers, as if sleep would come easier that way. The words are simple, but they bleed sorrow. They also raise questions. Were the nuns witnesses, or were they participants? Forced to bury the innocent to survive themselves. Legends sprouted around these graves. Villagers spoke of women seen wandering the fields at dusk, searching for their children. Others claimed to see small handprints in the mud after rain, though no child lived nearby. These are not just ghost stories, they are the attempt of memory to demand justice. Now pause and think, if your ancestors lay in such a pit, forgotten and nameless, how would you honor them? Would you bring flowers to the field? Or would you demand that the truth finally be spoken aloud? History is not just in bones, it lingers in ink, in the shaky handwriting of monks who dared to record what others wished forgotten. In a monastery tucked deep within the Bavarian forests, a collection of brittle parchment was discovered in the 19th century. Most were prayers, psalms, endless litanies written to pass the lonely nights. But hidden between them was a curious entry, dated during the height of the 14th century. We buried them without bell, without candle, without prayer, for they were not like the others. Who were these others? The manuscript does not clarify. Some historians argue it referred to heretics, enemies of the church, or perhaps people excommunicated. But the wording suggests something stranger. People considered too dangerous to be buried in the consecrated cemetery. The monks described hurried burials at night in silence, far from consecrated ground. No crosses marked the soil. Instead, the pits were covered with heavy stones, as if to pin the dead down. And then comes the most unsettling line: we sealed them there, lest they walk among us once more. Now pause. This was not a horror story written centuries later. This was a monk trained to write the truth, convinced enough to put this warning in ink. Either he believed the dead might rise, or he was part of a secret ritual designed to make sure they never could. Imagine holding that parchment today. Its edges crumble at your fingertips, but the weight of its words presses on your chest. Would you treat it as evidence of fear-driven superstition, or would you whisper a prayer yourself, just in case? Among the most disturbing discoveries are the bodies that refuse to rot. In a pit outside Prague, archaeologists uncovered remains that looked disturbingly fresh. Despite being centuries old, the skin was leathery but intact, the teeth bared in grimaces that looked almost alive. Some called them natural mummies, preserved by soil conditions. But the villagers had a different explanation. They were never meant to decay. Medieval legends speak of the unchosen dead, souls so cursed or corrupted that the earth itself rejected them, to prevent them from rising. Villagers often drove stakes through their chests, severed their heads, or placed heavy stones on their bodies. In fact, skeletons with such marks have been found across Europe. Was it superstition, or evidence of real fear? One chilling example, in Italy, a woman's skull was discovered with a brick forced into her mouth. Scholars suggest it was a ritual to prevent her from chewing her way out of the grave. Yes, chewing. She was labeled a vampire of Venice, not by Hollywood, but by her own neighbors. Now picture the archaeologist who first uncovered her. One moment you are brushing dirt from bone, the next you find teeth clamped around a brick. Do you laugh at medieval paranoia? Or do you feel a shiver when you realize someone once feared this corpse enough to silence it forever? This is where history and horror blur. Because whether or not these corpses could ever rise, the fear that they might was real enough to shape how entire communities treated their dead. And fear, as you know, leaves a longer shadow than flesh ever could. So here's the thought for you. If you stumbled upon such a body tonight, would you believe in science, or would you grab a stake, just in case? Not all mass graves were dug in panic. Some, disturbingly, appear to have been dug with ritual in mind. In Transylvania, yes, the land later tied to Dracula, archaeologists uncovered a grave where the bodies were arranged in a circle, heads pointing inward. At the center lay a broken sword, rusted but unmistakable. This was no accident. It was ceremony. Historians argue about its meaning. Some say it was symbolic, burying warriors together with their broken weapons as a warning. Their fight was over. Others whisper it was darker, that the arrangement was meant to bind their spirits, trapping them in an eternal circle so they could not rise again. One folktale speaks of a warlord cursed by his enemies. He was buried not once but 3 times, each in a different grave, yet each time villagers claimed to see him walking the hills at night, his armor clanking like chains. Finally they broke his sword, scattered his bones, and sealed him with heavy stones. Even then, some swore they still heard the echo of metal at midnight. Think about the psychology here. These were people who lived daily with violence, and yet death itself was not the end for them. They feared the afterlife spilling back into the world of the living. So much so they turned graves into prisons. Now ask yourself, if you were one of the men tasked with digging such a ritual pit, knowing you were not just burying bodies but locking down souls, how steady would your hands be? Would you chant the prayers louder, or would you whisper a nervous joke just to keep from screaming? Not all who touched the mass graves did so out of duty. Some were driven by greed. In the late Middle Ages, grave robbing was as common as pickpocketing. Though far more dangerous, jewelry, coins, even the hilts of swords were buried with the dead, and desperate men saw opportunity where others saw horror. One tale from Bohemia tells of a gravedigger who returned at night to a battlefield pit. He thought he could pry gold rings from the swollen fingers of the dead. But when villagers found him the next morning, his body was sprawled across the mound, eyes wide in terror, hands clutching at his own throat as if strangled by invisible fingers. Some whispered the dead had punished him. Others joked that he simply choked on his own greed. During excavations centuries later, archaeologists uncovered graves where bones had clearly been disturbed, skulls turned upside down, ribs scattered. Was it looters, or was it ritual reburials, where villagers rearranged corpses to calm them? The line between robbery and ritual blurs when fear and profit collide. And here's the strange part. Some grave robbers wrote confessions. In a 15th century diary, one thief scribbled, "I thought I stole from the dead. But it is I who was stolen from. My sleep, my peace, my laughter, they took it all. Whether it was guilt or something darker, we may never know." So imagine yourself stumbling into a grave at night with only a lantern. Would you dare touch the jewelry on a corpse's finger? Or would you hear the soil shifting and run before the earth claimed one more thief? Modern archaeology has a way of draining the mystery from things, does not it? Carbon dating, DNA testing, isotopic analysis, they turn bones into data. And yet sometimes the science only deepens the questions. Take the mass grave discovered under a Paris parking lot in 2015. Scientists expected plague victims. Instead, the DNA revealed something stranger. These were people from across Europe, Italy, Scandinavia, even the Middle East, all buried together. What catastrophe could have drawn them into the same pit? A mercenary army slaughtered. A refugee camp wiped out. The science pointed to mixed origins, but not to a cause. Even more unsettling are the signs of violence found in supposed plague pits. Fractured skulls, broken ribs, arrowheads embedded in bones. If these were victims of disease, why the wounds of war? Unless, of course, fear of infection justified killing the sick before they could spread it. Science does not print that in neat headlines, but the bones whisper it anyway. And then there is the silence of missing records. For every grave we study, dozens more remain unacknowledged. Wars burned archives, monks censored chronicles, kings erased defeats. The graves remain as mute testimony against the official stories. So yes, science gives us dates and isotopes, but what do you make of the fear, the panic, the rituals? Machines cannot measure dread. And yet, standing at the edge of a pit, every archaeologist feels it. Would you, if I placed you beside that grave with all the science in your hands? Would your heart still beat faster when the wind rattled through empty skulls? Sometimes a grave tells you more by what it hides than what it shows. In Lithuania, a pit was uncovered that left archaeologists speechless. The bodies were not arranged like soldiers, nor stacked like plague victims. Instead, they were twisted, broken, some with spines bent at impossible angles. Several had extra ribs, elongated skulls, and teeth filed into sharp points. Science tried to explain it: congenital deformities, rare diseases, genetic mutations. But local folklore whispered something else. These were not victims of nature. They were others, marked as cursed, monstrous, or possessed. In medieval villages, difference often meant danger, and those who looked unnatural were sometimes killed, their bodies hidden away from consecrated cemeteries. A legend tells of a child born with black eyes who never blinked. By the age of 7, livestock fled from him. The villagers, in terror, cast him into a pit with stones bound to his body. Was he simply sick, or did fear create a monster where none existed? Archaeologists found that in the Lithuanian grave, heavy rocks pinned many of the corpses, their jaws broken, their chests caved in. This was not accidental. It was deliberate containment, as though the living wanted to make absolutely sure the unnatural would never return. So here's the climax. If you stumbled upon such a grave staring at skulls shaped unlike any you have seen, would you trust science to explain it? Or would you feel the ancient fear rising in you? The whisper that maybe the villagers knew something we have forgotten. Most of what we know about medieval mass graves comes from bones and chronicles, but once in a while a story slips through, a voice that refuses to be silenced. In the archives of a small French abbey lies a fragment of parchment written in trembling script. I alone walked away. The writer described a night raid on a village. Soldiers stormed in, torches flaring, blades flashing. Within hours, everyone he knew was dead or dying. The survivors, barely breathing, were dragged to a pit. He was thrown in too, but managed to crawl out under cover of night. His testimony is chilling not because of what he saw, but because of what he felt. I lay among them. I felt their hands still warm, pressing against me. I thought to cry out, but no sound came. I waited for the sky to speak, but the sky was silent. When I rose, I swore I would never speak of it, for the earth had swallowed my village whole. Imagine that moment. You are half buried, surrounded by the dying, the dead, the silence of the soil. Do you climb out, knowing you will carry the memory forever? Or do you close your eyes and join them? Because survival feels like betrayal, we call this history. But to him, it was a single night that replayed in his mind until his death. His words are faint now, ink fading, but his terror breathes through the centuries. It makes you wonder, if you were the lone survivor of such a pit, would you ever sleep again? Folklore loves the moonless night, the kind where shadows look thicker, where the earth seems closer to swallowing you whole. In medieval villages, they said such nights were when the mass graves stirred, dogs howled, owls screeched, and travelers swore they heard laughter rising from the ground. Of course, people back then found humor even in horror. One chronicle recounts a soldier joking as he shoveled dirt onto a pit. At least they will keep each other company. Better neighbors than mine when they were alive. Morbid humor was a survival tool, a way to keep hands steady when tossing bodies into the dark. But there is something eerie about that kind of laughter. Imagine hearing it beside a mound of freshly turned earth. Does it calm you, or does it make the silence afterward feel heavier? Even today, archaeologists report nervous jokes during digs. One researcher admitted we joke about them standing up, just to remind ourselves they won't. But do they really believe that? Or are they whistling in the dark, hoping the ground does not answer back? Humor, after all, is thin armor. Beneath it lies fear, grief, and the nagging thought that maybe the dead do hear, and if they laugh, it is not with you, but at you. So ask yourself, if you stood over a pit on a moonless night and heard a chuckle behind you, would you laugh too, or would you run until your lungs burned, never daring to look back? Not all secrets of mass graves lie in open fields. Some are hidden beneath stone and shadow. In the archives of Vienna, a forgotten map surfaced, drawn in 1472 by a monk-turned cartographer. It showed not just rivers and towns, but tunnels beneath a fortress. In one tunnel, a mark, a cross over a circle, accompanied by the words here, "The silence is deepest." When modern researchers followed the map, they found a sealed chamber. Inside were dozens of skeletons, their bones blackened as if by fire. No records mentioned a battle there, no plague, no famine. The chamber itself was a secret, meant never to be found. Why were they prisoners walled alive? Victims of ritual sacrifice, or deserters punished in silence? The strange part is how deliberate it felt. The walls bore scratch marks, desperate hands clawing stone, and yet the floor was littered with charms. Tiny crosses, amulets, even a child's toy. Someone had buried them with tokens of comfort, even while sealing them away. Mercy and cruelty, pressed together in one chamber of stone. Legends claim that beneath many European cities lie similar tunnels, holding the unwanted dead. We walk above them daily, unaware. The cafe, the library, the subway station, they might sit atop centuries of silenced voices. So here's my question. If you unfolded a map that marked such a tunnel beneath your own city, would you follow it? Or would you fold it back quickly, pretending you had never seen it at all? Let me place you in a scenario. The year is 1349. The plague has reached your town. Soldiers herd the sick into wagons, priests mutter prayers too quickly to mean anything, and neighbors avert their eyes. You are not sick, at least not yet, but fear is a stronger disease than any plague. By midnight, you find yourself thrown into a mass grave. The soil damp against your skin, the weight of bodies pressing down. You are alive, you are breathing, and yet you cannot scream because screaming would tell them you survived. Imagine lying there, hearing the groans of the dying beside you. Their last breaths brush your ear, their hands twitch against your chest. You want to move, but every twitch might reveal you. The moon is hidden, the night is heavy, and the soil shifts as shovels rain down. The pit closes above you, each layer of dirt muffling the world, until all you hear is your own heartbeat, louder, faster, screaming inside your skull. And then silence, complete silence. You wait, not knowing if you are buried forever or if someone will return. Hours stretch like years. Your mind begins to conjure whispers, the voices of those already gone. Stay with us, they murmur. You do not belong up there anymore. Would you pray louder than you have ever prayed in your life? Or would you laugh the way some men laugh on the gallows, because fear has nowhere left to go? This is the nightmare many never woke from. Some archaeologists have found skeletons clawing upward, hands frozen in the act of escape. Others found teeth marks on bones. Desperate survivors trying to chew through bindings, or worse, trying to feed. These are not the tales we read in textbooks. They are the silent screams locked forever in the soil. Now ask yourself, if you survived one night in such a pit, would the sunrise feel like salvation? Or would you forever feel the soil clinging to your skin, whispering that you still belong to the grave? We love to think we are smarter than our ancestors. Science explains what faith once feared, but stand at the edge of a mass grave and tell me, does logic really silence the dread? Archaeologists uncover evidence of both reason and ritual. A skeleton shows signs of plague, yes, but its skull is smashed. Its chest pinned by a stone. That is not science, that is fear. Another grave reveals bones cut clean, almost surgical. Was it an early autopsy or a ritual dismemberment to neutralize the dead? Science shrugs. Folklore nods knowingly. The truth is, both sides bleed into each other. Medieval people mixed prayer with practicality. Burn herbs to cleanse the air, half medicine, half magic. Hammer nails into coffins, not superstition but precaution. Even today we lock more doors. Do we fear thieves, or do we fear something else? One archaeologist once joked, "I am a man of science, but I still won't camp on a plague pit." Everyone laughed. Then they all admitted they would not either. Knowledge does not erase instinct. The earth pulls at us in ways data cannot measure. So if you were there, digging, documenting, classifying, would you rely on charts and carbon dating? Or would you slip a small charm into your pocket, whispering a prayer you do not quite believe in? We have walked through battlefields, plague pits, secret tunnels, and graves that refuse to stay silent. We have heard monks whisper, villagers curse, and archaeologists joke nervously to keep from trembling. And now, we stand together at the edge of the last pit. The earth is quiet tonight. But quiet does not mean empty. Beneath our feet lie centuries of fear, grief, superstition, and perhaps truths we are not ready to face. Mass graves are more than history. They are mirrors, showing us what panic, war, and survival can do to the human spirit. And yet here you are, listening to me at night, letting these voices into your own room. Maybe you feel the shiver down your spine. Maybe you laughed nervously at the jokes, the way medieval gravediggers once did. Or maybe you are just wondering how much of this was real and how much was nightmare. That is the point. In the end, history is never clean. It is stained with fear, humor, ritual, and silence. Before we part, let me thank you for staying with me through this long, dark journey. Stories like these are not easy to carry, but you carried them with me. And now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, if you found yourself standing over a newly unearthed pit, would you lean closer to listen? Or would you walk away before the whispers reached your name? And if you want me to guide you into another shadow of history, let me know what you would like to hear next. Don't forget to like this video if you have enjoyed the journey. And of course, subscribe for more nights like this. Until then, may your dreams be calmer than the graves we have opened tonight.